Hi, folks. I'm Father Joe Grimaldi. You can call me Joe, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast. But now, here's our host and friend, Ken Calvert.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Father Joe Grimaldi podcast. Ken Calvert alongside my dear, dear friend, Father Joe Grimaldi. Father Joe Grimaldi, you were never a deacon, were you?
Well, yes, I was.
Well, explain that, because today's episode is, how do I become a deacon? Not me personally, but So let me just lay this out for you, okay? I follow a lot of the younger priests on Twitter, all right? And It seems that the year before they're fully ordained a priest, they're designated a deacon. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay. They cannot say Mass.
No.
They can't consecrate bread and wine.
Correct.
So, but people that aren't in the seminary, lay people can become deacons as well.
Correct.
Okay, now I'm confused.
Well, let me put it this way. There are two types of deacons. You have what we call transitional deacons. Mm-hmm. And those are the deacons that you're talking about, people who are preparing for priesthood, and sometime within a year, it doesn't have to be an exact year, they're ordained deacons. And deacons can read the gospel. They can preach. They can't hear confessions. They can't consecrate, as you said, bread and wine, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts, and I'll explain a little bit further what that's all about in a moment. But then you have what's called permanent deacons. And permanent deacons are usually married men, don't have to be, but married men, who get ordained purposely to serve as deacons, preach the word, read the gospel, but also get involved in some type of ministry, whether it be visiting the prisoners or visiting the sick or helping the poor. So you have the two types of deacons, the permanent deacon and you have the transitional deacon. Now, the thing is this, if you go back to right after the resurrection, you have good old St. Stephen. We celebrate that feast of St. Stephen the day after Christmas. Do you remember that song? Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen when the snow lay on the ground.
Really? Oh,
good and crisp and even.
Really?
Anyway,
okay, yeah.
That's just an aside. But anyway,
Nicely done.
You don't want to hear my voice.
That's available on iTunes right after this show.
So St. Stephen was a deacon. How did that happen? Well, you have a lot of Greek-speaking Christians at the time. And so they noticed that the widows had no money. Nobody was caring for them. The elderly the same way. And so, people said, we got to do something to help these people. What can we do? And so, in the early church, when they came out with certain rules, it was not something that, for example, nowadays it takes all sorts of ecumenical councils and things of this sort. It was a spontaneous solution. And so they felt they needed special people who would spend time taking care of the poor, the widows, helping them in whatever way, visiting those who couldn't help themselves, and so on. And so that has been the main purpose of deacons through the ages, and that's to be a help in one way or another.
A Good Samaritan?
Yeah, well, a Good Samaritan is anyone who offers himself to do... Yeah, but this is on a permanent basis.
All right. So this is beyond just being a Good Samaritan.
Correct. It's somebody who does this on a regular basis. Now, the biggest complaint through the years has been that very often deacons were like flower pots. Okay? They appeared on the altar whenever there was a major ceremony, all in there, decked out in their vestments and so on, but they never did anything else. Well, That's not the purpose of a deacon. The purpose of a deacon is to do ministry within the church. In other words, to help wherever there is a need, so that the priest could carry on his ministry in a separate way. Not that he shouldn't do any of that stuff, but he'd have more time to do what he ordinarily does, whether it be counseling and so on and so forth. So, as I mentioned before, the deacon is able to preach the word. In other words, the deacon reads the gospel and he can give a commentary on it. He can preach to the people on Sundays, on every day if he wants, if the pastor sees fit that that's what he's supposed to do. We have a lot of deacons in the church. We didn't 40 years ago, okay?
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't this relatively new?
It's relatively new. And not all priests are for them. Many of the priests don't want deacons. They see them, how should I put it? I'm not trying to cast aspersions on them, but many priests see it as a threat. It's doing my job. I'm supposed to be doing that. On the other hand, the deacon, if he's doing his job properly, well, then he is involved in ministry, important ministry, in taking care of the homeless and taking care of the prisoners and all of these different things. So preaching the word on Sunday is just one aspect, and then taking care of other things as best he could. The first deacon was martyred. That was St. Stephen. People say that Paul was in the crowd. He was hiding in the back, listening to what was happening. And people say that that might be when he saw this man, Stephen, being martyred, and said to the Father, Holy Father, he said, forgive them, forgive them. And so Paul was touched by that, and maybe it was the beginning of his conversion.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Do you have the opportunity to decide whether or not you want a deacon on the altar with you or not? In other words,
it's the parish.
It's simple, all right? You're saying 8 o'clock Mass
right
at St. Hugo.
Correct.
This coming Sunday. You arrive and you look over and you see Deacon Ken.
Right.
And you go, hi, Deacon Ken. Why are you here? And it's Deacon Ken says, because I was assigned to be with you. Is that how that works?
Yes, I was saying that that's not something you would ask, because we work on schedules that are made out 6 months ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
So we know if there's a deacon on Sunday or not. However, there are certain pastors, and this is what I was getting at before, certain pastors, they just don't want deacons around in their parish. Deacons are assigned to parishes just like priests are assigned to parishes.
Really?
So, for example, the bishop, after deacons are ordained...
I can see that with transitionals, but I would think that the permanent deacon most like to operate at his parish church.
No, it doesn't work that way. Let me put it this way. Many of them do function in their parish church, or what used to be their parish church. But that's not true, okay? The bishop has the authority to move deacons just like he moves priests, okay, from this parish to another parish. Taking everything into consideration, the bishop, being a very reasonable man, is not going to just haphazardly do something that goes against the will of the deacon. Usually there's discussion, there's logic that's brought forth to decide these things. So it's not, how should I put it, it's not so stark, that, okay, today I'm just going to move him from here to there, okay, unless he does something crazy, and then the bishop could remove him from his ministry.
Here's what I'm thinking out loud. This tells me that this is somebody that's deeply, deeply committed and religious, but would also like to be married and have a family, so therefore he can get the best of both worlds. Basically do 90% of the heavy lifting that the Catholic priest would do, while at the same time still having an outside job and a family.
It's interesting you say that. It's never a unilateral decision on the part of the deacon. He has to confer with his wife, and she has to be for it 100%, or else they will not accept him into the training program. The training program usually consists of about 4 years of doing study, and particularly during summertime, vacations. But basically the deacon and his wife, because his wife gets very involved. It's almost like, I suppose if you're used to seeing the Protestant ministers, you know that the wife is usually the organist or the one who heads up the parties for the parish or whatever the case might be. Whereas the deacon's wife has to know what the deacon is doing when he's not at home. And so it usually takes the consent of the wife for the deacon to begin, or for the person to begin his studies for the diaconate. Now, you mentioned something that was very interesting, because the deacon also takes the vow of celibacy.
What?
Ha, that's what I expected. Okay.
Okay.
So
I'm listening.
You're listening, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Once his wife passes on, he's not allowed to remarry.
Why? That's okay. I mean,
It's a very controversial point in the church.
yeah.
And
And I see why.
Yeah, and having been involved in the administration of church, I'll say this much. There are rare occasions when the deacon, after his wife passes, can say, look, I have a child who's mentally challenged. I can't do this myself. I need to be married. Rome will consider that and may allow it. But it's not going to be just a matter of whim. In other words, I suppose the whole idea of deacons just dating and goes against what people are expecting of the deacon in that ministry. I can't give you a clear answer, I'll be honest with you. However, I know it's very controversial, because particularly when a deacon loses his wife at an early age.
I was going to say.
Yeah, and
catastrophic events occur.
And they do. But the deacon has taken the vow of celibacy.
Post-marriage.
Post-marriage. So he cannot remarry
Yeah.
as a deacon. So it does happen, but it's rare. It does happen.
Okay,
that they marry.
This begs the ultimate question.
Yeah.
Why does the church need deacons?
Well, the church needs deacons primarily because there's such a need for ministry among social activity, among prisoners, among homeless. You could go on and on and on. And the priest himself cannot do it by himself. So he needs someone who's as dedicated, ordained, and able to help in those areas.
All right, I'm going to get mail on this one, I'm sure. But it would seem to me that within the body of the parish or within the Catholic Church, there would be all sorts of people, practicing Catholics, that would be more than happy to handle visiting and socializing and counseling prisoners, or helping out with Forgotten Harvest, or managing hospital visits, reaching out. We should, by the very definition of being a Catholic, aren't we supposed to do all of that anyway?
Boy, you know your obligations. Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, but by the same token, this is not just volunteering to do something for a certain amount of time. This is what the lifestyle of the deacon becomes. And so that very often there's a lot of good-hearted people, and I agree with you. You see them every day in all of the churches, people that volunteer their time in the office, people that volunteer going to... I know I have a couple of friends that visit the prisons every Monday night and read scripture to the prisoners and so on, and pray with them and so on. So these things are possible, but they're not always steady. And it's like one is more of a ministry, the other is volunteer work. Also, when it is volunteer work, I can quit whenever I want. If I don't want to go this Monday, I don't have to go. Whereas with the deacon, that's his ministry, and he knows he's got to be there. And as far as assisting at Mass, you're right, we don't need somebody to assist the priest at Mass. However, it's nice when you're having a nice celebration for the deacon to read the gospel,
sure.
And then he may not want to preach, the priest will preach, or there's all sorts of possibilities.
I'm sure there are very, very gifted speakers.
Oh, there are.
Within the ranks.
But and then, of course...
And if I'm a priest, I can't get jealous if the guy delivers a better homily than I do.
You shouldn't, but you're also human. But the other thing, too, you don't want the deacon to be a deacon just to serve, in quotes, as a flower pot.
Right.
The flower pot he's all decked out in his vestments and just stands there.
Yeah.
So you want them to be people who are involved in ministry.
I think for the most part, when people look at the deacon on the altar, probably anyone on the outside, especially if it's a wedding, just assumes it's two priests saying the Mass.
A lot of people do, yes. You're right. Because the vestments are similar.
Right.
They're not the same. The priest wears a chasuble. The deacon wears what's called a dalmatic. And the dalmatic, it looks like a chasuble, but it has sleeves. In other words, they're hard to tell because they're pretty large sleeves.
Right.
So they almost look like part of the chasuble. But it's more than just it's different from a chasuble.
Do they wear the clericals, as you call it? The clericals, folks, by the way, those of you that are like me, that's that Roman collar. Yeah. Do they wear the collar?
Some do, some don't.
They can, though.
They can.
And they can marry a couple.
Oh, they can do weddings, yeah.
Sure.
They can do baptisms and weddings and so on and so forth.
All right.
Wearing clericals is a touchy point, by the way, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
One of the things that the church has criticized for at times is clericalism. And clericalism is when priests lord it over others, that they are priests and they're above them, this type of them, above the people. And therefore, they constantly wear these 10-inch collars. I'm exaggerating, of course, but they wear these big collars and, they have all of the paraphernalia,
right,
and so on and so forth. So that very often turns people off, okay, the clericalism, where...
Well, the cape and the papal priest, Italian hats and all that. Now,
there's a time and a place for that kind of stuff, but usually in the United States, it's not the place, and... some deacons do wear it. Some bishops say, okay. However, a number of bishops that I've known will say, no, do not wear the collar because it sets you apart from the other people. And it also confuses you as a priest.
I think that's wise.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, for the sake of those of you that don't have the video portion of the program, oh, that's right, we don't have a video portion of the program.
I don't think we do, yes.
Father Joe is not in his clericals, but he is wearing green because it is the ordinary season.
Very good.
So, with that said, today I learned a lot from Father Joe Grimaldi. I learned all about deacons, and we will see you next time on the Father Joe Podcast. I'm Ken Calvert, he's Father Joe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, Ken. We'll see you soon. This is Father Joe Grimaldi, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Father Joe Podcast.
If you'd like, you can email us. It's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. That's frjoepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook. Simply search Father Joe Grimaldi. And thanks for listening, everyone.